There we go. Okay, perfect. Let me get some Zoom stuff out of the way and we will get rolling. Okay, cool. So I am in the content area of our class in the weeks 11 and 12 area. And let's kind of run through our objectives for today. Another fairly straightforward class that's very much focused on Project 2. What we will be doing today, first and foremost, is I want to talk about the wireframes that you guys submitted. We will give each of those a look individually. I'll give you guys some feedback on them. I wouldn't necessarily call it a critique because they're not a design at this point, but certainly if I see anything that I might recommend that can be strengthened up on them, I'll recommend that to you guys today. It's important that we do this before we move on to the part 4 of our project, because the design, which really is the next step, really is going to hinge on the wireframes being a strong grid that you can design on top of. We'll wrap up class talking about that part 4 so that you got a clear understanding. But that's really, for most folks in this class, this is the time that you kind of look forward to, because you actually get to design, you get to take those wireframes and begin to fill them out with content. But we'll talk about that and what my expectations are for next week. Ultimately, you'll be doing designing in Photoshop or Illustrator based on those wireframes. But I guess let me cut to the chase though and get to the wireframes first. I can elaborate on part 4 in a moment. As we are rolling along with this, what I would recommend, again, we've had this conversation before, guys. You know, it's a pretty full class here. I'll be moving fast through these. If you guys have feedback for each other, which I would absolutely encourage, if you have suggestions, please use the chat area that you can use to put in any feedback that you might have. I did look at a few of the wireframes. Kathy, you had actually sent me yours over the last couple of days. We've been talking about them, so I'm very familiar with those. I just, before class started, I looked at Shaz's, I looked at Jennifer's, just to give a quick peek. Those were all looking awesome. What I think I'm going to do, I know I normally go in order, and I will, but I'm going to start with Kathy's just because I think they are very well done. And I think that it will provide a nice glimpse for you guys in terms of really what a well put together wireframe looks like, so that at least we have sort of a baseline. You know, I know I built one for you guys last week, but I think it'll be good for you to be able to see what one of your classmates did. And I would actually say I've literally only looked at 3 of these, but Chaz and Jennifer, yours are excellent looking as well. I think that either one of those would be very nice examples also. But at least that'll sort of create a baseline for us, so you have an idea of, like, you know, what these things potentially should look like. Not that I'm showing you this because I want you all to feel like you've got to have the same grid that Kathy has. It's far from that. It's much more about the way that the wireframes themselves were constructed. So I'm going to start with those. And Kathy, while I'm pulling this up, if you could maybe just take a brief moment and remind us what the subject of your website is.
Yeah, my subject was Grindelwald, Switzerland, which I was centering in on it's a mountain town with the Alps mountains around it. So I was centering on the high energy activities that someone could do if they wanted to visit there, kind of to draw those type of people in.
Awesome. No, that's fantastic. So if you
I did actually change it up just a little bit, and maybe you can make suggestions as far as the links at the top. Yep. I did, I wasn't sure if I should, make that the same color as, eventually the same color as my, logo and all of that area. But sure,
and that's something I think that over the next week, really 2 weeks, as you begin designing this, we can kind of explore that. One of the things I'm going to talk about later with our homepage concepts, ultimately for next week, you guys are going to take your homepage and you're going to use the grid, and you're going to design from that exact same grid 3 variations on your homepage. And on those, we're using the same grid over and over again, but you're exploring different colors, different typefaces, and different images. So Kathy, you'll be able to really kind of explore that question over the course of the 3 variations.
Just to let you know, Peter, you're
oh yeah, go ahead, Kathy. Oh,
yeah, no, I was just going to say you're kind of breaking up, so I'm not able to hear you, just to let you know.
Yeah, no, thank you for letting me know. Let me take a look and see here. Usually it'll tell, there'll be like a little meter that'll show if I've got a bad connection here. Yeah, I apologize. If the connection does get spotty, guys, and you can't hear what I'm saying, definitely do what Kathy did there and just let me know, and I will absolutely repeat myself. So I'm not sure exactly how much of that you got, Kathy, but that question in terms of like, when you're dealing with like a background color or wondering like, how these should be colored. What we're going to be doing next week is you're going to take this grid of the homepage, and using the exact same grid, you're going to design 3 variations on the homepage. And on each one, I'm going to be expecting you to explore different colors, different typefaces or fonts, and then different images. So that's something that you can very much kind of explore on those 3 variations. And we can kind of figure out what's the best way to go. In fact, I would recommend strongly on one of your designs for next week, filling in maybe the background on the navigation, and maybe on another one, not filling in the background, leaving it white perhaps. And maybe on a third one, possibly maybe this top banner is an image that maybe that these links maybe sit on top of or something. Not saying you have to do those things, but those are absolutely all the things that we'll begin to explore over the next week. And then we'll critique those and pick one that you would then ultimately refine. But I have, in terms of your wireframe here, I mean, it's well constructed. I know we talked about that via email. I like that you actually even have an idea of what these photos are going to be. That's not something that has to happen, guys, on a wireframe, but it's helpful if you do actually know what they're going to be and you're not necessarily just kind of, slinging images around. So I like that a lot. On the homepage, Kathy, I really only have, I've got a question and I've got a suggestion. My suggestion would be for the home, maybe not having like an actual little button for home, but rather either having the text here or having the logo here becoming the home button. I feel like for the better part of a good decade now, we very much sort of have been trained that the logo on a homepage will be the home button that will take us back. And there was a time maybe a decade ago where that was maybe not as intuitive, but really any major website acts that way now. The question that I have for you is where it says like city tourism, will that be a clickable link here within your hero banner?
I wasn't sure. I thought that that could be, but honestly, I was just kind of playing around with it.
Yeah. Okay. And that's okay. That's something that, I mean, you'll want to kind of figure that out for, certainly for next week. But again, being that you're going to be making variations of the design for next week, maybe that's something that you consider playing with. Maybe on at least one of the 3, you leave it just as text. Maybe on another one, you try it as a button, or maybe then on the third one, it's just like clickable text, or maybe it has an underline or something to maybe make it a link. So something,
I figure most likely it wouldn't be one. I was just kind of like letting the person that was visiting the site know that it was, for city tourism of that town.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Yeah, and that, I would absolutely be fine with that as well. But again, we talked about this. This is it's a well put together wireframe. I'm a big fan of the way this came together for you. For your subpage, I think that this is a good way to go about this project. You've got these nice simple columns that will ultimately contain content. We'll talk about, I'm actually going to well, it won't be next week. We've got another critique next week, but the following week, I will do a demo for you guys on the construction of a page like this, where not only is it 2-column, but really in each of these columns, we've got corresponding content, and we'll talk about how to ensure that these things line up with each other and looks this nice and tidy. But this is a good solid layout. I love that you've got like nice large photos and some small text that accompanies that, because more than likely it's going to be the images that are the thing that is ultimately going to, people are going to act upon in terms of deciding to go here. So no real suggestions for you here on this. Let's see. I mean, again, this is a small thing. I guess if I did have any suggestion, it would be just when you actually code this thing, we just want to make sure that the navigation is centered within the nav container. You did a good job here of having equal padding on the top and bottom. We would just want to make sure that, the same thing is happening here on this page. But excellent work on these. They're very functional. They're very professional. I would recommend for your portfolio, if the final website itself becomes a portfolio project for you, I would absolutely accompany that in your print portfolio or your online portfolio with these wireframes. And I think the only tweak that I would really recommend making to put these in your portfolio in the wireframes would be to bump these up. I don't need you to do that for my class. I'm thrilled with these. These are gorgeous. You've got nothing to worry about. But in a portfolio, I would definitely make sure that the navigation has got the exact same sort of padding as what you have here on the homepage. But
Okay.
well done. I will absolutely be using, this set of wireframes you've got for examples for future classes. So great job. All right, so what we're going to do now, guys, now that we've sort of seen what just a good.
Oops, I just missed the last thing you said again.
Oh yeah, no worries, Kathy. I had mentioned that I mean, they're well done. I will likely be using those as examples to show future classes.
Okay.
So now we'll start from the top down and kind of work our way down like we have done in the past. But again, hopefully you guys have a good idea of what really like good, solid, professional wireframes really look like. Jacob, as I'm pulling up yours, if you could also remind us real quick about what the subject for your website is.
Yeah, so I'm doing a bakery in Scotland called Aran Bakery.
Cool. Okay. Cool. So, Jacob, I would recommend within this potentially a few things. I feel like a logo or the bakery name, perhaps up on the top here, would be a nice touch, or if not up top here above the links, certainly on this like nice large like hero banner area that you have here.
Yeah, I was planning on putting the name on the bottom in that little box.
Cool.
Along with the address and any other like social media links.
Okay. And I think that will certainly work. And I think you may even want to double up here. I think having a logo up on the top could be valuable from the standpoint of it could end up being a home link, like we talked about with Kathy's. However, it does look like you have 6 links here. So certainly if one of the links was just said home, that would be fine as well. That would certainly be functional. I don't know that I would necessarily put the address though directly on top of like the large image with the logo.
Oh yeah, I was planning on putting it in the box below here, the text box.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Okay. But yeah, I think if you have a nice large image of the actual bakery here, or not, this doesn't necessarily have to be the bakery, but probably more like, some of the baked goods.
Yes, yeah.
But so it is a fairly simple layout. I would recommend probably having a footer in here as well. And the reason why I'm suggesting a footer, and consider this, Jacob, maybe the address or contact information maybe does not go here, but rather goes in the footer. And the reason for that is the footer can stay consistent on every single page. Versus if that address is really only like on the homepage, we're forcing folks to have to go back to the homepage potentially to see that anytime. By all means, I think you could certainly use this this box as a blurb. It could be a welcome statement, a 1 or 2 sentences welcome statement, or it could even just be I don't know, it could be a simple sentence or two about could be more of an about thing possibly. But yeah, I would probably stick with address and contact information, like phone number type of a thing on the very bottom.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Let's see here. Let's take a look at the subpage. Jacob, what subpage are we looking at here? Which would this be?
So this one, I believe, would either be the menu or the hours. The menu and hours one will be pretty much exactly the same, other than the fact that the text boxes at the bottom will be different sizes and different text.
Okay, cool. So one thing that I would recommend would be like for a button like this or for headers. I feel like like you want to potentially actually on a wireframe properly, type in like what that actually would be. It's absolutely okay to have, body copy being lorem ipsum for sure. We also tend to, on a wireframe, we do tend to, for headers, we do tend to make them larger than the body copy just to establish like what those are.
Yeah.
But would this be a clickable button here?
No, that would be the big announcement saying that this is the menu or this is the hours, and then below would be the actual like Monday through Saturday or Monday through Sunday, or then the like footnotes or like the holiday hours or something like that.
Okay, cool. So talk to me real quick about then what these links are, just so I don't have to necessarily go back to your flow chart.
Yeah.
What are we, how are these pages being broken down?
So the first one, from starting from the very left, would be home,
Mhm.
and then I would have menu, and then I would have hours.
Okay.
Then I'd have about us, then contact, and then our process.
Okay, perfect. That really helps clarify, because for a moment I thought that this page was what you were saying, is this would both be the hours and the menu on the same page.
No,
But I got what you're saying now. So this is representative of how either one of those pages would be laid out.
yes.
So that's good.
Yes.
That's perfect, because I was going to suggest otherwise that perhaps that we don't have those two things on the same page, but no, that's perfectly fine. Okay, cool. So yeah, again, do consider that the whatever footer that you establish on the homepage, that gets carried over here as well.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, footers tend to, guys, not only can they be functional in terms of having information like hours or location, or even like links to social media, like pages, but they also, from a design standpoint, they sort of formalize or formally end the page. Without one, the pages generally just tend to kind of feel like the content's floating and hasn't really ended. It's kind of hard to tell if there's like more stuff that we should be able to scroll and see. Okay, so that's really my biggest suggestion to you, Jacob, is to get a footer in place. And possibly, I'm not saying you have to, because again, you have the amount of links to compensate, but possibly having a graphic for the like for the logo to head home, or just be willing to maybe on, if you're going to have nice large hero banners on every page, maybe on each of those in either like the top left or maybe bottom right or something, having like having the logo put right on top of that image, just from a branding standpoint, to kind of like repeat that.
Yeah, it's a good idea. I'll do that.
Okay, cool. All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, Kyle, let's give yours a look here next. Kyle, remind us, if you would please, what the subject of your site is.
Yes, so mine focuses on the city of Seattle.
Okay, cool. Okay. Cool. Wireframe looks nice and clean and professional. I think my only suggestion to you would be, I feel like this might be a little bit text heavy for it to be the first thing that we see after the hero banner, but I have a really simple suggestion for you, Kyle. I like that you've got these images here. Maybe consider having, rather than going text, image in the column, consider going image, text, image, so that these two paragraphs maybe get sandwiched in between an image in the top and the bottom. I feel like hitting people a little bit too quick on the homepage with type, but I do think that that it could be balanced very nicely with a couple of images. That's really my only suggestion to you. This looks really nice. We may want to consider, when we're actually coding this, making the design a little bit larger than the width of 960. Seeing these links at this size, I feel like they might be a little cramped. And if maybe we go to a width that's a little bit more like, I don't know, like 1080, for example, that might buy us a little bit more room in between these. But I guess the other thing could be, Kyle, is that maybe if this logo became a little bit smaller, that might be the other way to buy you a little space.
Yeah, and I was thinking I would probably give myself a little more space when I actually go on to create the website.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally. And yeah, I like the way you put that too, Kyle, because I think for all of us to understand, like when I make some of these suggestions, that would definitely be the suggestion that I would make when you're actually building the website. For the most part, I'm not going to want you guys to go back into these wireframes and make those tweaks. that'll happen as you're actually coding or designing the next step of these for next week. But really well done. That was really my only thoughts on the homepage here. Let's give the subpage a look here. Okay, good. This is nicely balanced. Certainly more text, but that's okay. That's absolutely what a homepage, I'm sorry, what a subpage is for. Something to maybe consider, this is about the only thing I would throw out there for you, Kyle, is that if like, for example, if these end up being like specific locations or whatnot, then possibly like a subheader at the beginning of each of these, possibly. I mean, there's other ways that we could do that as well. We could do an overlay of text on top of the images that maybe communicates that as well. So you've got a few options there, and those are things that you can certainly explore next week when you are, or I should say the following week, because next week we're designing the home pages. The week after that, we'll be banging out our sub pages. But yeah, these will serve you very well, Kyle. Excellent job on these. Nice, clean, professional. Yeah, you are good to go.
All right, great, thank you.
Yep, no problem. All right, Chaz, let's give yours a look. So Chaz, what is the subject of yours again?
It was Cedar Point. I actually kind of went off. It's not exactly what I was gonna do at the beginning. I kind of went off of your little critique there, but so what I'm gonna do is focus just on the rides and do the thrill levels.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so I kind of like that ideal. I'm a more visual person, so what I kind of did was I kind of already created the homepage all in Illustrator, and then I just put my boxes over them to kind of show you guys where that's going to all fall into place. But I already kind of got the look of the first page already.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and that can certainly be, one of the designs that then you show us next week. I'm definitely going to still want you to do 2 more variations of that.
Gotcha.
But let's see here. My only real concern on this, Chaz, is that the links being on the right-hand side of the page, and let's kind of talk about like why that is potentially a concern. I don't mind that they're vertical, but I would strongly recommend that you consider putting them on the left-hand side and then potentially bumping this text over perhaps into this area.
It's kind of laid that way because of the photo I had there.
Okay. Well, I mean, photos ultimately can be swapped out and should never really dictate the functionality of the site.
Right.
So the links ultimately, okay, I think we talked a bit about this before, but it's absolutely worth repeating. We're looking at these right now in a browser. In fact, I'm going to go to an actual like website like this. So remember we talked about, guys, that how we have, as web designers, we have no control over the size of the devices that people are looking at our websites on, whether it's a phone, whether it's a computer. There are different size screens for phones, for tablets, for laptops, and for desktops. And for every one of those things, there are different screen sizes. The only constant that we have that we can control is that any one of those screens has a top left corner, which is the 0, 0 point. And from there, we have varying widths and we have varying heights on different monitors. So things that we want to really kind of like lock down and have consistent is the left-hand side, because what will end up happening, Chaz, is if we base this on an image, that might look perfect on an image on like your computer.
Right.
But if we look at it on a smaller or a larger monitor, these links potentially, because remember the right-hand side is always the thing that is adjusting when we're looking at websites. So top corner always is top left, but depending on the screen size, interfaces are going to be smaller or they're going to be larger.
Gotcha.
So those links, being that they would be on the right-hand side, they would be adjusting in and out based on the monitors that we see. And again, it might look perfect on the monitor that you designed it on for that image, but on my computer or the next person's computer, these links might be scooched over and covering something that they shouldn't be, and it might just really affect the design.
Gotcha.
So for something this important, we absolutely want to have those over here. Now, the alternate for you, if that just ends up just really kind of compromising the design, my suggestion then would be that we just do a more traditional sort of links on the top type of thing.
Right.
That could even be putting the nav even above the hero banner. You know, we can definitely put them above it, like over it. But we could also, again, if that is really intrusive with the images you plan on using, we can put them a navigation bar above the entire thing. And that way they never ever intrude at all on any of the images.
Gotcha.
But that would be that's sort of really my biggest concern when I look at these. Otherwise, I think this is good. This will be a fun grid to put together. I'm gonna end up using this for talking about how to start to overlap things like this. So I'll pull this up in a few weeks when we start coding these sites, and using this as a perfect example of how to take divs or containers and start to overlap them, not only in terms of how to overlap them, but then how to control how they stack in terms of how they layer, starting to give things what's called a Z index in your style sheet, but what we would know as maybe like layers in like Photoshop or Illustrator in terms of how things stack. So this will be a fun one to reconstruct. The only other thing that you want to think about, it does look like you have thrill level of high repeated twice here.
Yeah. I just would, like I said, I was doing it, copy and paste.
Yeah,
I
no
think
worries, no worries. Just be aware of that.
Gotcha.
But otherwise looks good. I actually really dig the image based footer. This is not something you see a lot, but when it is done right, man, it looks great. And I think like a silhouette of the park is a wonderful way to consider, bookending the site. Yeah, I think again, this type of layout is perfect for this kind of a site here. And obviously, depending on the page that we're on, you'll have more or less. So it's very flexible, Yeah, really just consider dealing with the links as the primary thing that you'll want to figure out between now and next week.
Okay.
But again, nice job on these.
Thank you.
All right, Bella, let's look at yours next. Bella, what was the subject again for yours?
I was doing locations in the Netherlands that relate to Vincent van Gogh.
Excellent. Yep. Okay. Cool. So one of the things that I definitely like within this is that it's clean, it's professional. You are using you're establishing a really strong typographical hierarchy here, just in what we were seeing here. And obviously you'll push that even further when we move to the design phase, but I like that. I believe my only suggestion for you here on your homepage would be to definitely get a footer in place. Might be a very small one, might be a large one. I'll let you make that decision. But for reasons you've heard me talk about with some of the other students, I do feel like from a design standpoint that a footer makes a lot of sense in bookending the site. Cool. Your subpages look good here. So this will be a pretty easy one to put together. I'm happy to see that you have established a tight grid line where both of these are leaning on. Where we can get into trouble in terms of putting these together is when we alternate, but they are different sizes. Don't get me wrong, that can be done. So if some of you are hearing that and going, oh no, I did that. Don't worry. I mean, we can, it becomes an interesting challenge and it makes for a good demo for me to build for you guys. But this is definitely much easier because we don't necessarily have to do things dramatically different from area to area. So this will absolutely work for you. Again, it's just a matter of potentially getting a footer on there. Similar to what I mentioned with Chaz's a moment ago, this is a nice flexible layout. Depending on your subpage, you can obviously have a third one, fourth row, fifth row, sixth row. But we're establishing here that it certainly works with just two, and that can just be repeated over and over and over again. It actually ends up being very easy to code something like this too, guys, because once you make the code for, one of these and then a second one like this, it's just a matter of more or less copying and pasting when you actually do start coding, and just simply plugging different images in and changing up your type. It's easy peasy. But yeah, really, Bella, I just want you to consider getting a footer in here for next class. And in fact, for any of you guys who I'm mentioning getting a footer in place for, what you may want to consider is just doing a quick Google search for like website footer, like design ideas, for example. And that can really help you kind of get an idea of like what some good functional footers potentially can look like. You'll see a bunch of them, from very large footers that contain like a lot of information to you know, again, some will actually end up having, you know, images in, others will have a repeat of links. But there are some very creative examples that you can run into as well. These are actually all very much kind of look the same here. Maybe we'll put in some creative website footer ideas. I don't know, these are radically different from some of the others. Although, you know, again, I like when we start to see like shapes that might change on some. Some have forms built right into them where, you know, we can ask a question or sign up for a mailing list or something. You know, others will have, you know, like little more visual elements. There's a lot of ways you guys can go with footer. You know, in some cases, yeah, if you have, maybe you're doing one, guys, that has like, I don't know, a bunch of restaurants or locations or something that you have within your site, maybe putting logos for all of those, like inside your footer with quick links could be another thing to consider. Other times, footers will just have like some fun kind of graphics within them. So there's a lot of ways that you guys can go with that. Don't feel that it just has to be like a copyright statement or social links. I mean, it could be those things, don't get me wrong, but you can actually have a lot of fun with footers if you do, you know, expose yourself to some of the possibilities. But good work here, Bella. Again, just strongly consider getting a footer in place.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Jennifer. I looked at this right before class started. I thought this was really well done. This is another one that is just it's very well constructed. Similarly to what I mentioned to Kathy earlier. If this site ends up going in your portfolio, I would actually have your wireframes go in the portfolio as well, because this is certainly professional level. This is something that you know, an art director would love to see.
Okay, there is one thing that I did change. I forgot to contact us on the links on the top. I do have them on the bottom, but I think there should be one on the top.
Let's see.
Yep. The
Oh yeah, I see.
yeah, I forgot on the links on the top, you know, the home, spring, summer, fall, winter, blah, blah, blah.
Let's see.
Yeah. I'm going to tell you what I did wrong first.
So, you know, Jen, just a suggestion. You actually already have your 6 pages here.
Yeah.
Maybe something to consider. If you're going to, rather than having just like a full contact page, I would be open to you having your contact, like if it's going to be a simple contact form, it could actually just go right into your footer. I'm not saying that has to happen by any means. If you've got your heart set on a contact us page and you know what that's going to look like, no worries, but something to consider.
I like the footer better.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Let's see here.
Thanks.
The only thought that I have for you at all, and this is something that we can really kind of flush out next week with the design, is I don't feel like the size of this type is really should be representative of what the final site would look like. It's super small.
Yeah, and it really wasn't. It's not at all. I was moving things around last minute.
Yeah.
I was just putting some text in there. That's not the size at all that I would use. I mean, I don't even think that's 12 point. So
no, it's probably not. It's probably not. But yeah, just in case, I wanted to at least verbalize that so that that you know that it didn't look like that next week. And I was like, oh shoot, I should have mentioned that to Jen.
no, I fixed that already.
It's funny, guys, back when monitors were much smaller, like when 800 by 600 monitors were the standard, 8 pixel type was like all the rage back. So like back when I was an undergrad in the late 90s, like literally there were websites that exclusively sold you whole bunches of font packages that were 8 pixels tall because like that was the thing for the web. And an 8 pixel font was just fine actually on an 800 by 600 monitor. But as we get into these higher and higher resolutions, small type is actually becoming less and less frequent on the web. We've got much bigger type, especially for the phones too. But yeah, the grids on these, Jen, or at least on the homepage here, looks fantastic. I would maybe potentially say to you, if this homepage is a link up here, my only suggestion otherwise would be scrap that and just make the logo the homepage link.
No, it's just a note.
Okay, cool.
The next one is the about page, and I put that up there as
Gotcha.
well. So page
Perfect.
1. Yeah, that's just, yeah.
Okay, excellent. Let's see here. Yeah, no, this looks good as well. Cool. I like the way that you're kind of doubling up these images. This will be fun to build. This will be like a 3 column, you know, layout here, another 3 column on the bottom. all wrapped up into one. This would be a really fun one to build. This might be another one that I use for a demo.
And I wasn't really sure about the contact us on the bottom there. I just kind of threw it in, but I'm not liking that.
Yeah.
I'd rather have like, an image and some information, like maybe a fun fact or something.
Sure.
Like what I was telling you about the troll pickup on the
Yeah.
mountain, drop off when you leave. Maybe I could do something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because yeah, especially if that contact us info is just
Yeah.
going to go right into the form, then I think that's absolutely fine.
Okay,
All
cool.
right. Yeah, great job on these.
Thank you.
Carlos, let's give yours a look. Hang on, let me just download this and unzip it real quick. Carlos, while I am doing that, if you could maybe talk real quick about what the subject of your website is again, that'd be awesome. Well, let's see, I don't know if Carlos is here. Let me see. No, okay. Cool. Well, Carlos, I will leave you some feedback regardless so that this can get captured in the recording. But let's see here. Okay. The navigation looks good, Carlos. I feel like on the actual design, we probably want to have possibly, it depends on how much text you're going to have in the actual thing. The text over the hero banner may end up being smaller. It really just depends on ultimately what you're going to say. I think the biggest critical comment that I have for you, which is actually, it's not a big one in terms of the amount of time it's going to take to tweak, but I do feel like we want to be consistent with the width of the columns here under your call to actions. I like the first and the third, although even they are a little bit inconsistent from each other. We've got, type that more or less is lined up here with the side. This one actually comes over a little bit. Obviously, you'd want it in the real thing. You'd want those to be, tidied up under the image. But this one, we definitely don't want the middle one to extend outside of the edges there. It just ends up feeling, they really all they all feel like they're different widths from each other. Now, in the code, that'll be a pretty easy thing to fix. Whatever we set one to, we can set them all to in your style sheet. So not a big deal. You definitely want to think a little bit about like what info you want to have in your footer. Not that I need to see that in here, but this is very large text for a footer. So, again, it depends on what you had planned on putting in there. It might be appropriate. We can look at that next week in the design phase. But my initial hunch is that that text is probably too large for your footer. Let's take a look here at subpage. Cool. So again, I guess it depends on what you plan on having here in terms of content. I do feel like 5 columns is probably 2 columns more than you want on a website. 2 to 3 columns really is like the max, or 3 columns really max on a website. That's, it's different than print medium. Print medium, you can get away with 5, no problem. But again, with varying sizes of screens, really one of 2 things is going to happen. Either A, you're going to go into a responsive mode where these 2 things are going to drop down, but when you're at an odd number like this, and we maybe 2 drop down, it's going to leave the 3rd one and a gap underneath it. So it's not something I recommend. The other thing would be if it's not responsive, the user would have to scroll not only up and down on the page, but left and right, which is never a good thing to have them scrolling in both directions. Easy fix. I mean, I would probably just go to a 3-column layout, or actually, how many do you have? You've got 10. So to keep it even, I would just go 2 columns and then have 5 rows of call to actions. Or another option would be, again, if this is all hypothetical, if we only need 9 call to actions, you can certainly get away with 3 rows of 3 potentially. Okay, so something to think about, sir. But otherwise, they are looking good. Let's see, Jalen, how about yourself? What is the subject again of your website?
Mine was going to be like tourism sites in Seoul, Korea. So we can go from historical to the more modern stuff.
Cool. Yes, that's right. Okay, cool. Nice clean wireframe. Well done here on this one. I don't know that I have a suggestion for you. I like the call to actions. Having the button laid on top of them, they're nice and functional. Nice footer here. Let's see. Cool. I very much like these. Maybe consider, this is actually interesting. And I'm curious to see what this is going to look like. Something I want you to think about for next week. Normally on a 2-column layout like this, I would recommend left aligned type, so that we're creating a, we've got this nice clean grid line, and that would create a clean grid line here as well. But I kind of like this clean grid line. Try for me for when we start designing the sub pages in 2 weeks from now. I'd love to see a variation of this where the type is left aligned on one and then right aligned on the other.
Okay.
But yes, I like this. It's my only suggestion. It's not something that we'll need to explore for 2 weeks, but you are looking good with these and absolutely ready to roll. Nice
All right,
work.
thank you.
Okay, let's see. We're doing pretty good here, actually. We looked at Kathy's already. Jose, let's look at yours. Okay. Jose, if you could remind us, what is the subject for yours?
Yeah, it was for single travelers going to London.
Okay, cool. All right, let's take a look at this from a grid standpoint, and then I'll have a couple of suggestions for you already, but let's see. Okay. All right, so a couple of suggestions. First is more of a, I guess, a technical suggestion. So the links and like this bit of lorem ipsum here are definitely like smashed, right? I would really caution you against, and all of you, I had this conversation actually earlier on my Wednesday class on Monday morning, but so I kind of feel like a broken record with it. It's an important thing that I feel strongly about. We never, as designers, want to smash type for a few reasons. I mean, number one, it's a huge graphic design faux pas. If you're working professionally with other people, they are definitely going to question like your graphic design background. The reason why is that it really starts to distort the letter forms. Like if I were to zoom in here real quick, you can see that when we smash type, for example, that the horizontal lines become very, very slim compared to the vertical lines. So we start to compromise the integrity of the letter forms. And it's just not, it's not a professional look. Now on a wireframe like this, it's not like a deal breaker by any means, Jose. I just want to point it out for like future projects. I would definitely not smash type. Okay. Let's see. I feel like as well that I don't necessarily mind when things alternate like this, but really, really radical differences in the width of the type. Oftentimes it's not a great look when you actually like fill these out. And by all means, what you can try for next week when you're doing the 3 homepage variations, you can definitely try one like this. But I would also love to see one where you are maybe lining up all your CTA images on one side and the accompanying text on the other side. I would, if you end up using the CTAs on the right-hand side, do consider right aligning the text. Just the way that this looks, this is nice, like that the image ends, we've got a gutter here and the text is aligned to that gutter. What will happen here, like we have, these are referred to, this is the rag line. So this is like the jagged edge of the text. When we have a jagged edge against a gutter, against a clean edge of an image, it ends up creating very odd areas of negative space. So, always, not necessarily always, I think in Jalen's we saw a good example where she kind of broke that rule, but she did it very well. In this case, I do feel like if you do have a image to the right of your text, I would absolutely right align that type in there, just so that it's got this kind of a feeling up here. Okay, small thing, easy to take care of. All right. Otherwise, in terms of the structure of this thing, it looks good. It should suit you very well from a design standpoint. Let's see. Cool. Now, in this case, I don't necessarily mind the way that we're bouncing around on these, because I feel like the ratio is pretty good. the image occupying about 25%, actually more like I guess about 25% of the row. Actually, I don't mind that at all. That looks good. On the actual thing, I would just say that we probably want to just make sure that we've got a little bit more padding above and below the text, possibly. Although it depends. Again, if the borders are not going to be in the actual design, which I wouldn't recommend that they are, that might be enough space. But it looks good. This page, I don't really have a suggestion for you on. I think you're good to go with that. Again, just consider the alignment of the type here, as well as potentially trying one version of it where maybe all the CTAs should just line up on one side, at least for the home page.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Mhm.
Okay, let's see here. Nick, I believe yours is next. Nick, what was the subject of yours? Let's see. Is Nick here with us? No. Okay. Cool. Well, Nick, I will leave you some feedback here. I mean, just with that initial scroll that I did, things are looking good from a grid standpoint. I don't have suggestions for you there. I would recommend, though, just from a professionalism standpoint or craftsmanship standpoint on your wireframes, just be aware of things like where we have lines that come out of the boxes. It's just not the best look. I know I'm really splitting hairs here, but it's a good looking wireframe. But that's one thing that kind of portrays the professionalism of it, would be something like that. And then try and stay consistent in terms of the typefaces you're using. It looks like you're using Arial or Helvetica rounded. I would recommend that you do that same thing on the links up there. But the grid looks good. This will serve you well. It's a classic sort of homepage design that is tried and true. And this looks good as well. Yeah, no suggestions for you there. Just again, just kind of mind little things like that. Okay. Yeah, cool. Nick, you're definitely ready to move forward with it. Looking good. All right, Caprit, let's give yours a look here. Oh, let's see. Let me zip this or unzip this with a download. We'll give her a look here. Caprit, what was the subject again of your? Let's see. Can you repeat that one more time?
Disneyland.
Oh, Disneyland. That's right. Yes. Okay. Cool. In that case, I love the huge, giant hero banner that just is going to be a wonderful opportunity for you to showcase, actual Disneyland. Got a nice amount of space for the Disney logo as well. Yeah, the top part of this is looking good. Here, let's see. Looks like there may be a repeat of the place to visit links.
Oh, yeah.
So that's something just to be aware of. Small thing, but for the design next week, let's tidy that up. Okay. Cool. So again, in the actual version of this, let's make sure that we've got some line spacing in between those things. So let's talk about that real quick, because there is an easy way to deal with that, guys, that I'm just want to show you real quick. You may already know this, but I'm going to show it just simply because, like, before I knew the shortcut, I really struggled with type in Adobe programs when this type of an issue would arise. What that's coming from is if you ever go in and you modify the line spacing between your type. Oh shoot, I don't. Let's see. Give me a moment. I don't know my Adobe password off the top of my head. But hang on just a second. I do have it in a folder here next to me, so give me just a moment to dig that out. Oh, excuse me. Okay, let's see. Okay. All right. So again, my apologies if you guys already know how to fix this, cool. But I'm guessing a lot of you don't, because I didn't as well. I probably used Adobe applications for a good 10 years before I figured out what I'm about to show you guys right now. So the line spacing in between your lines of type. You probably already know how to control that, but you may not necessarily, at least in the property inspector, might not necessarily know how to actually like adjust it. So by default, the line spacing will have a setting, but if you go in here and you tweak this and you change it to something else, like I've got it, let's say at 22 point. The next time I use some type, it will be set to 22 points, which may not work for that particular font. So you can change it manually right here in your character panel. And this works in Photoshop and Illustrator. In fact, this works in every Adobe application. But you also don't necessarily have to type in a number here because you might not know what the number is. Rather, if you have all your types selected like I do on my screen, if I hold down my Alt Option key, or if you're on a PC, it's just an Alt key, and you use your up and down arrows, you can control the line spacing every time I go up or down and adjust that, okay? Kind of like how if you use the right and left arrows, you can adjust the letter spacing. So I'm actually adding much more space in between my letters or making it go down. So anytime I see something like that in a class, I always like to point that out because a lot of designers just never learn that. And it's a wonderful way to start to control that. Because I used to actually go and hit return multiple times to start adding space. And that ends up being a nightmare to try and work with. So not a big deal here, group, but do make sure for the final version of this that we want to have more lines. Cool. This is perfect. I will definitely show you guys how to embed videos into your website. So if you end up finding things on like YouTube or Vimeo that you want to embed into this, we can absolutely make that happen. Again, for a professionalism standpoint, definitely make sure that we are spell checking group. We got like video is misspelled here and here. Another thing I showed my class on Monday, and I know there's a little overlap, like Jen, you're in both classes, so you've heard this already, but for the rest of you, there is a spell check feature in Photoshop and Illustrator, which is a godsend for folks like myself, who I'm a horrible speller, folks. So you can, for any project that you ever make in an Adobe application, I always just recommend doing a really quick spell check for obvious reasons, because it finds those things. So you can go to edit, you can go down to spelling and do a check spelling. Same thing in Photoshop, it's under the edit menu. Photoshop doesn't have the drop down, it just says spell checking, but that's a wonderful way to deal with that. And again, I say that from personal experience just because I tend to misspell stuff a lot in my projects. The grid looks good though, Gurpreet. I only really recommend that you do get a footer in place. Let's see here. Let's look at the next page. There we go. Let's see. Zoom out a little bit. Cool. Yeah, again, the grid looks good. So one of two things. You've heard me say this before. I would either right align this text so that we don't have the uneven rag lines against the clean edge of the image, or conversely, I would take the image, all the images, and place them on the left side and have the text on the right side, so that we can have that left aligned edge on the right hand side of the image. Simple thing, but it'll make for a cleaner, more professional look on the site. And again, same thing, having a footer here on this page would really help wind it down. All right, cool. Folks, nice job on these wireframes. There were none that needed to be completely torn down and rebuilt back up. So that's awesome. Why don't we turn our attention next to talking a bit about the next phase of the project. And I may start, we're going to have extra time. We have more time right now than I anticipated. We got through those fairly fast. So I might start introducing the next part of coding to you guys here today. We'll see. Let's talk about the next project, or next phase of the project first, though. That's the main goal. So I'm back in the weeks 11 and 12. And this is just sort of an explanation, or a further explanation on the from the spec sheet that I gave you guys back on week 9. Let's look at the spec sheet first, then I'll bounce back over here to week 11 and 12, and I'll read through that with you guys. So on the project 2 spec sheet, it breaks down, of course, let's go full screen with this in a moment. There we go. So it breaks down the individual parts, of course, on here. And there we go. And we are now on part 4, where you guys are going to start designing your homepage concepts. So essentially what we're doing is designing, for next week, you're designing and presenting a series of 3 design concepts for the homepage. Now, again, I can't stress this enough. You're taking the grid of the homepage that you made for this week, and you're designing 3 concepts based off of that grid. So the grid does not change. You're just simply exploring 3 different color schemes on those grids, 3 different font combinations, and 3 different sets of images. Okay, so you're essentially skinning that wireframe. You're filling it in with stuff. You can definitely still use lorem ipsum type for body copy, but for headlines or for buttons, for your links, I want to see what the actual type would be. Okay, you'll design those homepage concepts for your website, again, based on your wireframe. You can use Photoshop, you can use Illustrator. These designs will not be coded in HTML or CSS for next week. You're only laying out the design concepts in Photoshop or Illustrator. I don't want you to spend the time to code these things 3 different times. Okay? Each concept will be designed at 960 width and at 72 DPI RGB color. I did mention for last week that you can go beyond 960. So if your wireframe is bigger than 960, that's cool. Go ahead and do that. Each homepage design, again, will be based on the same grid from your wireframe. However, each concept should feature a different color scheme, different fonts. Again, making sure you're using web-safe fonts only and different images. Let's talk about that. Don't just use any old font on your computer, okay? Either make sure you're using web-safe fonts or Google fonts. So web-safe fonts are those fonts that are the same on a Mac and a PC. And they do change as we move along, but if you were just to like Google, like web safe fonts, and pull up a current list of those. So these are all the fonts. Helvetica is actually not a web safe font. I don't like that source. Helvetica is exclusive to the Macintosh platform. So don't use that. Let's see. Here we go. So some, basic web safe fonts: Arial, Baskerville, Bodoni. And these are the Mac, I believe, is Bodoni 72. PC is Bodoni MT. So these are the list of basic web safe fonts. Remember that you can use any of the Google fonts. So heading over to Google Fonts, you can use those. So just a quick suggestion on these. I showed you already how to use them in a website, but in terms of installing them on your computer so that you can use them in Photoshop or Illustrator, it's just a matter of choosing it and then downloading the family. So we talked about using the code over here on the right-hand side and copying and pasting that in. But to get them on your computer to use, rather than linking to Google Style Sheet, just download the family, open up the folder, and you just install the fonts. So it's the same thing on a Mac and a PC. You highlight the fonts, you double click, and on a Mac like I'm on, Font Book opens, you click Install Font. That gets them in there. On a PC, an equivalent window opens up. I think it's actually just called Fonts, and you would click the Install Font button. And then I can actually use that font when I'm working in Photoshop or Illustrator now. But again, make sure as you're designing, you're making sure that you're designing with web-safe fonts. Don't end up using just any old font that you want to from DaFont, okay? Because those are not, the large majority of the fonts on DaFont are not web-safe. The height of your design or your page will be determined by your design. Obviously, each of you have different heights for your design. So I'm not giving you a height. That will be determined by your own design. This is a typo. It's not week 3, day 2. As it says in our e-class in the week 11 area that you're doing that for next week. Okay. So there's a repeat of that information here. And as I'm saying here, those are due next week on the 9th. This is essentially just a repeat of what I said there, so you don't have to go back to the spec sheet. Again, you're designing and presenting 3 design concepts for the homepage based on the wireframe. All of you who are here today, or at least all of you who I went through the wireframes, you are good to go and you can move forward with your design concepts. If you have not submitted wireframes to me, you need to make sure that you do that before you do, work on the design concepts. So you can always email me those and let me, make me aware that you had submitted those to our folder. But again, I can't stress enough, guys. You're using the same grid for your homepage. You're just designing 3 different looks using 3 different color schemes, fonts, and images. Okay. You're only doing the homepage for next week, 3 variations of it. After we critique those and we figure out which way you're going to go with it, which of the 3, that's when we'll start working on our subpages. Okay. Again, these are not going to be coded in HTML or CSS. You're only laying out design concepts in Photoshop or Illustrator. I know I keep repeating that, guys, but after teaching intro to web classes for 2 decades, this is the question that always comes up. Students will always be like, do I have to code this? I'm like, no, you are not coding this for next week. You are simply designing in Photoshop or Illustrator, and you're just going to submit 3 PDFs of your designs. It'd be awesome if you submitted them all in one flattened PDF file. That'd be cool. But if you give me 3 separate ones, that's fine as well. I will deal. Okay. In terms of part 4, do we have any questions at all on that?
I have
So only the homepage,
Yes, only for the homepage.
and that's 3 different designs. Okay.
Correct. Yep. So you're opening up that wireframe in Photoshop or Illustrator, and you're starting to put things in place of the images where the images go. Typing out what your navigation would look like, filling in any background colors, adding borders, that type of stuff, but essentially making it look like your homepage would actually look, and doing 3 variations of that. Each variation, guys, should, from a design standpoint, should look different, but the grid will remain the same on each of them.
Okay. Thank you.
I had a questions about the fonts.
Yeah.
So I have like on my image that my thing that I already did, I actually dropped in a font that's probably not used on the web. But if I drop it in with the artwork, could I do that? Like these little headers, not
Yes.
using one.
Yes. So Chaz, if you are using a non-website font on an image, we can flatten that text as part of the image and just save it.
Got it.
So that would be the exception, is if you're doing something like that. Absolutely. But otherwise, in terms of body copy or headlines, things of that nature.
Yeah, it's more like the header things because it's kind of comic book looking is the look I was going for, and I think that might be a tough one to try and find.
It might be. I do know there are some comic book fonts. They might not necessarily be as extreme as the one that maybe you're using. But let's see here. Let's do on Google. I'm basically getting into like display and handwriting here. Is yours more like a little bit more of a thicker font, perhaps?
Yeah, it's a little thicker. Kind of like when you see that pow, blam, boom,
Yeah.
That type of font.
Yep. Let's see. I mean, this is definitely maybe not a comic book font, but definitely has some, some fun to it for sure.
Right.
Let's see. Yeah, the ones on Google, this is pretty much more kind of limited to. So there are other websites that do have web fonts, but a lot of times you've got to pay for them. Actually, I think Font Scroll, I believe, is still free. That might be one to check. Yep, still free fonts. That's good. Just see if they have any kind of comic fonts. I mean, Action Man kind of. I mean, I think they have some better options than Google Fonts, and Helsinki is not too bad. Actually, here's a good one, like Comica.
Yeah, that's not bad at all, actually.
Yeah,
It's
that'll
kind of
totally
similar.
work. I mean, again, it might not be exactly, but it definitely reads as a comic book font, So it still has some good mood and atmosphere to it.
Okay.
And these work in a very, very similar way to how the Google fonts work, guys. There's instructions for them, but essentially you're clicking on it. And then let's see here. Boy, it's been a while since I have used this. So you can download the TTF to install on your computer you use. And then let's see here. Where is our info for plugging this in? Let's see. There should be some. Let's see. Actually, we don't really have to worry about licensing because you guys are not using this commercially, so you should be fine. But I am looking for the code. Let's see. All right, so this is definitely not the way it used to be. Let's just take a look real quick. There should be information on how to actually use these things. That would be crazy if there was not. Let's see. Help installing fonts. Let's see. Okay, so it does look like they've got a video tutorial on how to use font scroll fonts here. Yeah, it looks like there's a video, which is nice. So that's what I would recommend, Chaz, is just to watch the video if you end up using that. For next week, you don't have to necessarily do that because you can just install them on your computer and plug them in.
Right.
Do keep in mind, guys, that if you are designing your design in Illustrator, you do need to create outlines of your fonts for next week. Otherwise, when I open up your files, I won't be able to see those. The alternate would be just saving as a flattened PDF. Although I would still recommend that you outline those fonts. I've seen flattened PDFs create issues as well.
I had a question. I haven't been able to turn my Photoshop or Illustrator files into PDF.
Oh, okay. Let's talk about that real quick, Jacob, and I will show you how to do that. So essentially in Photoshop or Illustrator, I'll do it in both so you can see this. If you go to, are you on a computer right now where you have access to those programs?
Yeah, I'm on a computer right now.
Okay, cool. So if you go to File and just to do a Save As, the key here is choosing Save on your computer and not to the cloud. So if I go to Save on your computer, that will give us a Save As dialog box, which allows us to change the format. So right here where it says Format, Adobe Illustrator, you can drop that down and the middle option for you should be Adobe PDF. Are you seeing that when you go in there?
I'm checking right now. Let me see.
Cool.
Let's see. Save as. Computer. Yes, it does give me that option.
Awesome, perfect. And it's going to be really similar inside of Photoshop as well. The key is anytime that you want to deviate. So by default, Illustrator is going to want to save as an AI file, an Adobe Illustrator file. And Photoshop is going to want to save as a PDF, a Photoshop document. So to get out of those formats, yeah, I was playing with some of my mask images the other day. I'll just use this guy. So if I wanted to save this as an alternate file, I would go to Save As. Again, just choose Save on your computer. And then from there, the Save As allows you to change the format then. And in this case, Photoshop is, it's going to be called a Photoshop PDF, but that will have the PDF extension as you see there. Okay. Quick suggestion then for all of you, when you go to save a PDF to submit as an assignment, uncheck these options here. So in Illustrator, it'll say preserve Illustrator editing capabilities. In Photoshop, it'll say preserve Photoshop editing. Uncheck that. Otherwise, it will not be flattened. It's going to save all your layers and your file size will be crazy huge. So uncheck those. It's actually for what we're doing, being this is a web-based class and it's not print, you can actually keep this check, the optimize for fast web preview. That'll help compress the file size. Do not use this, guys, if you're ever doing a print assignment. So those will be graphic designers who are maybe working in 300 DPI and you want a nice, like, nice high res file. Don't leave that checked, okay? Because that will shrink it down to a 72 DPI document. But again, for our class, that's actually, we can absolutely keep that checked. And then again, you would just click save PDF and, you know, give it a location. All right, cool. Let's see here. All right, yeah, and again, we will critique these next week. We'll definitely do a more formal critique where we will talk about things, you know, very much from a design standpoint. So again, any other questions on part 4 here? Okay, cool. All right. Well, you know, as you begin working on things, of course, as always, if you run into some issues, you have some questions, you want some feedback, you can always email me. We do have some class time left. I think what I will do with you guys, we probably won't go all the way until 2:45 today, but I'm going to use a little bit of this time to introduce the concept of Flexbox to you. Now, in here in week 11 and 12, I've got a number of links to Flexbox tutorials. In fact, maybe we'll actually, maybe rather than me doing the lecture, we'll watch one of these tutorials because it'll be a little bit more visual with you guys. I usually like to do my lecture and then jump right into coding with you guys. And since we don't have time to do both of those today, I don't necessarily know that the lecture is the best thing to do. Although maybe I'll kind of briefly talk about the lecture, at least to kind of plant some seeds in your heads. Okay. And then maybe we'll watch this 15-minute tutorial. But Flexbox is a relatively modern use of CSS. Here, let me open this up real quick, give us some visuals. Oh shoot, this is actually not my full lecture anyway. That's okay. Actually, I'll download this and this will be a fine little visual as I talk. Let's see here. No, that's not what I want. Give me a moment. Hang tight here. I am trying to figure out how to rotate this and I'm not seeing that option. Let's see. Excuse me. Oh boy. All right, hang tight. There we go. Okay, so I'll keep this up, but I'm not really going to read this verbatim. This is not my lecture. This is more of a talking point that I would use in a classroom. But Flexbox, guys, is a modern bit of CSS. It's been around now for a little while. I mean, it's probably going on a good 5 years where it's been very much the standard. But what's cool about this is that it is now built into CSS versus before it was part of what was called a WebKit. And I know we haven't talked about WebKits yet, but as new code is being introduced to the web via the World Wide Web Consortium, before new code, both CSS and HTML, is adopted and becomes official, it's released as what are called WebKits, which are not standardized code, and there's no guarantee that that code will work across all browsers. But it's been some time now that Flexbox has been adapted. And what it really is that it is code that's used for helping build your layouts in easy and flexible ways. Okay, so before Flexbox, we used to build our layouts in one of 2 ways. In the early days, when probably many of you were just just being born, the web was constructed in using tables to create layouts, which was fine from a standpoint of building really, really basic grids. But for anything that was more complex, tables were very limited because tables were always based on cells and rows and columns, and it was a very, very strict way to work in terms of your grid. What you did in a cell, and maybe the first cell of your row would throw things off in the second or third one. So beyond that, when CSS came into existence, we started working, like you guys saw, with divs. Very much like we constructed our first project, but divs could be very difficult to position. Well, I don't know, I need to go into a full history here, but before phones, let's say, divs were actually really easy to position. When phones came into the mix and all of a sudden responsiveness came into play, layouts were actually quite difficult to construct just using basic divs. Flexbox solves for that. Flexbox solves for multiple column layouts. It makes it a dream as compared to the nightmare that it was when we had to float things and have all sorts of code hacks, and it was just not a great way to work. That's what Flexbox offers us, is the ability to create really strong layouts. And that's really what it's for. It's just simply for setting up layout grids. It has nothing to do with anything else with CSS. It doesn't deal with the way that an image looks or the way that text looks. It's just simply a way for us to build grids in a much faster and more flexible way, okay? So as it says here, Flexbox provides a more efficient way to lay things out and also a more efficient way to align and distribute space amongst items in a container. You'll see that. It's going to take a lot of the math out of it for us, and it's going to do the math based on a number of different properties. So it builds these really flexible and efficient layouts that don't take much time for you guys to put together, and they work. They work well on desktops and on mobile devices. And as it says here again, like distributing space among items, there used to be quite a bit of math that was involved. That's all taken out of the equation, and we can control the alignment of things much, much easier as well. Okay, so I'll introduce Flexbox to you guys from a coding standpoint over the next few weeks. I'll likely build a walkthrough for you guys for next week, because when we meet in class next week, we're very much going to focus on the critique of your home pages. But the following week, when we are working on subpages and then you guys will start working on actually coding the layouts, that's when Flexbox will come into play. And I'll do a series of demos for you guys that will talk about how to build the layouts that you guys have proposed. Again, you'll find it very, very easy. And it's very much kind of like HTML and CSS is at its easiest level. It's a fantastic tool that designers like, because the code is not complicated. Let's see here. Let's take a look at that short video that I've got in the tight here. Look at the video that I put in there as sort of an introduction, more or less. I don't expect you, by watching this video, to immediately just start using these things, but I think it'll be a wonderful introduction to you guys. These are more, these are both text-based resources that are excellent. Especially this Mozilla Developers Guide. It essentially shows you everything that you can do with Flexbox. This is more of a snippets in terms of showing you very practical things that you could do, but it's not as comprehensive. So this one's a little bit more real world. This one's a little bit more like everything that it can do. But let's watch this quick tutorial. I think this will give you a really good idea of what Flexbox can potentially do for you.
This holiday,
in this video, we're going to dive into the different parts of Flexbox, starting with what Flexbox is and how Flexbox works. And then we're going to dive into the different properties that we can apply to Flexbox in order to lay out and style our elements as we want. So to get started, let's add a div inside of our body here. We'll give it a class of Flexbox container, since this will be the container that all.
I'm going to pause this just for a second because I want to explain what's happening here real quick, because I like this workflow. I don't use it when I'm at home on my laptop because I like to be able to blow my code up so you guys can see it. But I love working this way when I'm not sharing my screen. What is happening here right now is he's got Visual Studio Code open and he's just made his window like half size. He's got a browser window open where he's done a manual a file open, and he's opened up this file. So he can come over here and refresh this at any point that he wants to, as long as he's saving here. It's just a really effective way of working. Just wanted to kind of point that out real quick.
All our Flexbox items will reside inside. Then inside of this container, we'll add another div, give it a class, and we'll call this one Flexbox item. And we'll also give it a class of flexbox item 1. That way we know which item we're referring to when we style them individually. And if you save that, you'll see that we have a gray box show up on the right here. And that's because I've already applied some styles to these flexbox items so that we can distinguish them and see them. Now let's copy this and add in 2 more flexbox items and save that. And you'll see that we have now 3 flexbox items inside of our flexbox container. But we don't have any styling to actually make this a flex container. So to get started with creating a flex container, let's go into our styles here. We have our flexbox container selector, and we can just say display and set it to flex. And this is how we create a flexbox container. Now, if I save that, you'll see that all of our items are now the same height and they all show up in one row.
That code, guys, this right here, is literally one line of code setting the display of a container to flex, which does this. By default, any block items and containers, any div container is considered a block item. Block items by default stack on top of one another. The moment that you set that display, change it from block to a display of flex, that immediately tells your items to start displaying in columns. It's literally that easy to start creating columns out of things. Versus, again, not that I don't necessarily want to like backtrack and show you the old way of doing it, but it was a real pain in the ass to get columns to show up this way, working with floats. And really, not that it was horrible to make this happen. This wasn't hard. This would take about 4 lines of code to get this to happen. What was difficult was the way that those floats would affect things after this. We would have to do a complex series of clearing things, and just all sorts of issues would arise with the way that it used to be. Now with one line of code that is literally 2 words, we can create columns when we want to, okay? And that's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what it does, but that's probably the biggest thing right off the bat that it does. It just does many more things as well, but I just wanted to point out, that's it. This is the key component. The other thing I'll mention, he might mention this as well, I'm sure he does, but I would feel remiss if I didn't. None of the other code that he's going to use today will work without setting the display to flex. This line of code not only creates columns, but it also allows all of the other Flexbox code then to work, okay? So if you are ever using any Flexbox code from either this tutorial or any others, you must set the display of flex in order for any other Flexbox code to work, okay?
You'll also notice that if I shrink our browser, you'll see that these items will scale their size to fit within the browser. And as I make it wide enough for them to all fit, you'll just show up on the left side of the screen. And this is really the main thing that Flexbox has going for it. It allows you to style the flexibility and sizing of different elements in the container from the actual container selector here, this Flexbox container, without ever having to style the actual Flexbox items. So inside of the container for Flexbox, you can do things such as laying out your different elements across the different rows and columns, as well as aligning them inside of that layout. And then the items themselves, you can specify how you want them to flexibly grow inside of the container or how you want them to shrink inside of the container. To make this easier to see, I've created some background styles here. And if we save this, you'll see that we now have our Flexbox container, which is this yellow background item, and then our different Flexbox items with their numbers in the corner as these grayish colored with a border that is a little bit darker gray. This way we can see when we shrink our browser, you can see that these items shrink together, and as we increase it, they'll grow again. Now, before we get started with actually laying out and styling our different elements inside of our container, we first need to understand the concept of the main axis and the cross axis inside of a Flexbox container. I have these styles here that will show us the main axis and cross axis for our Flexbox container. And as you can see, this main axis goes horizontally across the entire Flexbox container, while the cross axis goes vertically. This is because our Flexbox container is laid out in a row as opposed to a column. Flexbox gives us a property on the container called flex direction, where we can set if we want our Flexbox to be a row or column-based layout. And depending on this, these main axis and cross axis will actually flip. So in a column-based layout, the cross axis will go horizontally and the main axis will go vertically. All you really need to remember is that this main axis will go the same direction as your layout. So in a row layout, it'll be horizontal, and a column layout, it'll be vertical. And in order to style the layout of these elements, you style them based on the axes, so the main axis or the cross axis, and not based on vertical or horizontal. So if we wanted to style our elements on the main axis, we would use the justify content property inside of our Flexbox container. Right now, our main axis has a flex start attribute applied to it, which means that all the elements will align at the start of the main axis. If, for example, we wanted to center these items inside of this main axis, we would change this from flex start to center. And if you save that, you see that now all of our Flexbox items are in the center of our container. Another thing that we could do is if we wanted to lay out our elements with space between them, we could use the space between property here. And now all of the extra space inside of our Flex container will be put evenly between all of the different items inside of our container. And if we wanted to have space on the outside of our container as well, we could use space around, which puts an even amount of space on all sides of the Flex items and not just in between them.
And that's what I was alluding to, guys, in terms of it eliminating the math for you. In the past, we would have to figure out the width of our items, subtract that from the width of the container, and then figure out how much space we wanted in between each of these things, and adjust that by creating margin lefts that were individual for each of these things. We can eliminate all of that by just putting these things inside of a single div that we flex, and then using these different justify contents. So it's wonderful. Like you saw a moment ago, you don't have to have the space around them like this. You can just use what we saw a moment, the space between, and then the first and the last item will be left and right aligned. And then the middle item will be centered. But again, there's a number of options. There's actually even more than what he's showing here.
This makes
those are definitely the more common ones, the practical ones.
Out items in a horizontal manner very easy inside of Flexbox due to this justify content property. But if we wanted to, for example, lay out things on this cross axis, we would use the align items property. And right now, the default for this is stretch, which means our items will stretch to fill the most amount of space vertically that they can. That's why some of our items that were smaller grew to full size. If we wanted to keep the size of our items, we would use flex start, and then all of our items would align themselves at the very top of our Flexbox container based on this cross axis. We could also use center here in order to center them vertically, which is one of the most important things that you can do with Flexbox. Before Flexbox, aligning items vertically inside of a container was nearly impossible. Well, with Flexbox is...
Yeah, I know that sounds ridiculous, that it would be nearly impossible to center an object vertically, but he's right. The hacks that it took to do that were lengthy and they were spotty. They didn't work on all browsers. It's always been easy to center something in the middle, horizontally. It's always been very difficult to center something vertically. And now it's being done with one line of code. This is another one of those things that for web designers about 10 years ago, when this started being implemented, like we would literally fall off our chairs when we saw this. It was just like, are you kidding me? Like this just saves an enormous amount of time. And it makes sense as compared to what we used to have to do before, all the hoops we'd have to jump through.
It's as easy as one line of CSS, and it will perfectly align all of your items inside of this container. The last way to align our items inside of our Flexbox container is to use the align content property. And this property is only for using on multi-line Flexbox containers. But as you saw, when we shrink our browser size, these items just shrink to take up the amount of space needed. But if we change our Flexbox here to use the flex wrap property and tell it to wrap, you'll see that now our items will wrap onto different lines instead of shrinking their size, as you can see here. And
this is how we start to create responsive designs that will have multiple columns on a desktop, but on a phone display, we'll stack one on top of one another. That right there, that flex wrap.
Line content property tells it how much space to put between the lines. For example, if we use flex start, all of our items will line up at the top of the container, while flex end will line them all up at the bottom of the container. An easy way to see this is if we add a height property to our Flexbox container. So if we put height here and we just make it, let's say 700 pixels, now you can see that flex end for our line content has made our Flexbox items all align at the bottom of our container, while flex start will make them align at the start. And this has very similar properties to justify content. For example, we could put space between here, and now we have spacing between our Flexbox item rows. And if we shrink this even further, You'll see that there's now even space between them as well, which is great. But align content is something that I don't really use that often. And really justify content and align items are the properties I use most, since they align your individual rows along the main and cross axis. Now let's revert that height back to the default, get rid of our align content, justify content, align items, and wrap. So we just have a normal Fluxbox container here. And we'll increase that size a little bit. And we'll also remove these axes since we no longer actually need them. Now, if we go back into our styles here, and let's say we want a column layout instead, we'll just use our flex direction, change it to column, and now you'll see that our different Fluxbox items show up in a column as opposed to the different row. And if we use justify content and we say center, for example, you'll notice that they don't center horizontally, and that's because they're centering inside of the column vertically. If we put that height back onto our Flux container, let's make it 800 pixels. Save that, you'll see that now they're centered vertically, and that's because justify content is using the main axis, which in this case is column as opposed to row. If we used align items, we put center in here and save it, you'll see that now our items are centering horizontally because the cross axis is horizontal inside of a column-based Fluxbox container. Now we can revert all that back to normal. So we just have our standard Fluxbox container here. And we can start to talk about the different properties we can apply to our different Fluxbox items as opposed to the Fluxbox container. As I mentioned, the container is really only for laying out spacing between your items as well as the positioning of your items inside of the container. The actual Fluxbox item properties are meant to either override those positioning and layout properties or to apply different flexible sizing to these elements. As you can see, by default, when we decrease the size of our browser, our items shrink in size. But if we wanted to prevent that on, let's say, only our first item, we could go in here, use the flex shrink property and set it to 0 to say we don't want it to shrink at all. And if we save that, you now see our first item does not shrink no matter how small our browser gets, but these other two items shrink together. We could also use the flex grow property if we wanted to tell our items to grow bigger. So if we increase our size here, we have all this extra space. Let's say we wanted our third Fluxbox item to fill that space. All we would do is set flex grow to be 1. And now that item takes up all the extra space, no matter what size our browser is. We can also use flex grow on multiple items. So let's say we want our second item to also grow. We can apply it to here. And as we increase our browser size, you'll see that they'll both grow proportionally to one another. So that way, this item, the Fluxbox item 2 and Fluxbox item 3 are the same exact size since they have the same exact flex grow number. If we, for example, change this to be 2 and increase the size of our browser, you now see that our Fluxbox item 2 is about twice the size of our Fluxbox item 3. You will notice, however, that Fluxbox item 2 is not exactly twice the size of Fluxbox item 3, as you would think by making flex grow twice as big. But all the flex grow property actually does is take all of the leftover space. So if we remove these flex grows here, you see we have all this leftover space, and it divides it between all the different flex grows. So if we have a flex grow of 2 here, we have a flex grow of 1 on the third item, Fluxbox item 2 will get twice the amount of available space that Fluxbox item 3 gets. So if we say that, you'll see that this Fluxbox item 2 has gained twice of the available space that was left over as Fluxbox item 3. And the reason that Fluxbox item 2 is not actually twice the size of Fluxbox item 3 is because we have a width set on our Fluxbox items. So it takes this 200 pixels and then adds the amount of available remaining space onto that 200 pixels. If we wanted to override that, we could use what is called the flex basis property. And this tells our Fluxbox where to start growing from. So if we change this to 0, our object will imagine that it is 0 pixels wide when it starts adding additional space to it. And if we did this for both of our items here and saved it, you'll see that now Fluxbox item 2 is exactly twice the size of Fluxbox item 3 because it started adding additional space onto them in a 2-to-1 proportion. So it added twice as much to Fluxbox 2 as it did to Fluxbox 3, but they had no starting point at all. They started at 0, which means that Fluxbox 2 here is twice the size of Fluxbox 3. When they started at 200 pixels, it still added twice as much space to Fluxbox 2 as Fluxbox 3, but they had a 200 pixel beginning size, so they weren't actually exactly twice the size as the other one. For the most part, flex grow, flex shrink, and the different justify content and align item properties are all you really need in order to create dynamic and complex layouts in either a row or a column-based container. But if you needed to override the cross-axis alignment of a property, you can do that with the align self property. And let's say we wanted our second Fluxbox item to be in the center of the container instead of stretching the full height of the container. We can just use that. And now you can see that this align self property overrides our align content of our other containers. And you can see that it aligns in the center here, while these other items are aligning stretch. And this can be applied to all of our different containers. For example, we can go up to our Fluxbox item 1 here and make this one flex end. And you'll see that now this aligns itself at the end of the container instead of stretching, which is the default for our align items applied to our Fluxbox container. The very last property that is left to talk about is the order property that can be applied to our Fluxbox items. This allows us to change the order of our items inside of our Fluxbox container without actually changing our HTML. So for example, if we wanted Fluxbox item 1 to be our third item, we would change the order to 3. Fluxbox item 2, let's say we want to be our first item, so we change the order here to 1, and then we'll change the order of this Fluxbox 3 to be an order of 2. And if you save that, you now see that our second item is at the beginning of our container, our third item is the second item in our container, and our first item is the very last item in our container. And
that's something that I don't know that we would use a lot. He's really just sort of showing you all of the different Fluxbox things. But what this is definitely demonstrating is that even in the, like by default, HTML containers show up in the order in which you code them in the HTML. Fluxbox has the ability though to completely reorder your containers if you want it to. Then not something you have to use. In fact, it's probably very rarely used, but it's an option. Realistically, most of the stuff he showed in like the first 2-3 minutes are the large majority of what you'll end up using for Fluxbox. He's just literally showing you all of the different options that are available at this point.
This is because we use the order property to rearrange the order visually of our items without changing the order in our actual HTML. This is a property I highly advise not using unless you really need it, because this actually messes up the flow for people using screen readers, since the screen reader will still go in the order of the HTML, which means they'll get Fluxbox item 1 first, Fluxbox item 2 second, and Fluxbox item 3 third, even though the order of display is different than that. This also messes up when you're tabbing through different form items. For example, if this was an input element for a text box, our tab would go to the Fluxbox item 1 first, and then Fluxbox item 2 second, even though they're displayed in order where it should be 2 first and then 3 second. So that's why I highly advise not using the order property unless you really need to rearrange the orders visually without actually messing with the HTML of the document. And that's really all there is to a Fluxbox container. For the most part, you just need to have a container that wraps your different Flux items. You give it a display of Flex to say that you're using a Fluxbox container. You then use the justify content properties and the align item properties inside of your container in order to tell it how you want to align these items inside of the container. And then lastly, you can use the different Flex shrink, grow, and basis properties in order to lay out your items individually inside of the Fluxbox container to grow or shrink as you need. A shorthand for these different Flex shrink, grow, and basis properties is just the straight up Flex property, where the first number is your Flex grow, the second number is your Flex shrink, and the last number is your Flex basis. This is a great shorthand property that you can use in order to apply all three of those different properties in one line. You can also leave off the later properties, such as if we only wanted a Flex grow to be 1, we just put Flex 1, and it will intelligently assign the Flex shrink and Flex basis properties without us having to actually manually set them. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video and learned something new about Fluxbox and how you can use Fluxbox in order to create dynamic.
So again, guys, probably all in all, more than a lot more was introduced there than you'll ever use. But I do really like this tutorial quite a bit because it's clear, it's concise, and you can turn to this anytime that you need to if you just have questions with like what the different properties do. So that will live inside of our class all semester, right inside of the Fluxbox resources area. And again, here are further reading if you decide you want to learn more about those things. But again, we'll end up starting doing Flexbox coding on our own. I'll build demos based around the layouts that you guys specifically submitted. So now that I know what the wireframes look like, I can start working on that then for you guys over the next few weeks. All right, so that's about it then for this week. Any last minute questions before we wrap up? Okay, cool. All right, guys. Well, again, we are finally at the point now where you guys are designing. So have fun with that this week. Making those home pages come to life in Photoshop or Illustrator. And as always, if you want any feedback on them along the way, you can always send them over to me to take a look at. Or if you have any comments or questions or anything, obviously you can email me as well. All right, guys, have a fantastic week. Within the hour, I'll have the video that I just recorded uploaded to YouTube and have a link inside of our class. So you can look for that as well if you need to.
All right. Thank you, Peter. Have a nice.
Have a good week.
Yeah, you as well, Jennifer. Have a good one, guys.
Bye. Thank you.